preview and prediction for Utah versus Oregon. Looking at this Utah offense, Nick, it's the epitome of balance. It's been terrific. It's been very overlooked, but it's still been a pretty good unit for them. Third, Cam Rising, 4 interceptions rather, 2,200 yards, 66% completion rate. I love the balance they possess. They have 250 passing yards per game, another 210 on the ground with Tavion Thomas. I love Thomas. He's a phenomenal back for his size, 6'2", 238. He can stop on a dime. He can make moves in an open field. He's just a phenomenal scheme fit for what Utah wants to do. Cam Rising's right behind him with 6 touchdowns, 335 rushing. Jalen Glover, he's been good, 298 yards and 3 touchdowns. Micah Bernard's not been that heavily involved, but he's still a quality player for them whenever they want to use him. The biggest thing for this offense is that Brant Kuithe, top tight end, went down after only 4 games with a torn ACL. It was a big loss for them because this is not a very deep receiving core. Dalton Kincaid, another tight end they had that was, a guy that a lot of people talked about coming into the year. So it's no surprise to see him have this success, but he's really taken the reins of this offense. 50 grabs, 649 yards, 7 touchdowns. Single-handedly beat USC. 16 receptions for 234 yards in that game. That was a ridiculous tight end production. He's showcased tremendous hands. Remember in the UCLA game, fighting from behind in that one. This is a tough player, Nick, for Oregon to try and defend. You look at Devon Bailey, though. Him and Money Parks with only 2 to get involved. 60 grabs, rather, 268 yards, average about 7 yards per reception. 5 touchdowns, 546 for Vili. 4 receptions. It's not a very deep receiving core, but turn out yards and points. What's the biggest key to success here, especially going on the road for Utah? They didn't really struggle back in week 1. That was the toughest environment they faced. So I think go into offense here, a good performance.
This offense, I love the balance here. The wide receiving core isn't deep, but that isn't really an issue when you have Rising and Thomas, who can both carry the ball with that solid balance, as well as Jalen Glover, who's another quiet back, Micah Bernard as well. This is a very diverse offense with a lot of different players who can make different moves. Dalton Kincaid, we knew he'd have a strong season, almost 650 yards receiving on 50 catches plus the 7 touchdowns. Vili, Parks, these guys, having quiet, good season. Parks, I want to see a little more of him, has 0 touchdowns, but he has 270 yards receiving on 16 grabs. Vili, he has 44 grabs, 546 yards plus the 5 touchdowns. I love the balance there. Rising and Thomas, this is a nice attack on the ground. We knew Thomas would be good this year. You and I raved about him in the preseason. 7 total touchdowns for him on the ground, 632 yards. Rising, 355 yards plus the 6 scores. Rising, he's been trying to keep the ball better. He has 4 turnovers so far this season, 4 interceptions plus the 19 touchdowns. I like the way he's kind of grown in the pocket as well. 66% completion percentage, 2,225 yards through the air for him. This offense can hit you in different ways. They hit you through the air, hit you on the ground. I love the balance they had, even if they're missing a guy like Kuithe, who's a really talented size tight end. I love this offense. I think they have a serious potential here to go into Oregon. They played in that loud environment in the swamp on week 1. I think that's kind of taught them how to kind of deal with these crazy environments, because it's going to be loud in Oregon. Those fans are going to be up for the game for sure. Later kickoff for them. They're going to be excited. This is a very important game. All the marbles for the team going to the Pac-12 title game. But I think this Utah offense has just enough talent to kind of put themselves over the hump.
The Utah offensive line's obviously been great in terms of a physicality standpoint. Paul Molly's been great at center for them. The rest of the unit, I think this offensive line really leads the charge for them. But again, great balance. If you look at their stat sheet on the year, from a pure number standpoint, each and every week they have tremendous balance, it seems. Utah, this offense, they seem to be clicking and heading in the right direction. They've shown great resilience this year. They're really fighting back against UCLA in that one. Against USC, they were down 59 minutes in that game. They've showed great resilience. Cam Rising has really developed as a leader, and that's going to be big here going on the road. Looking at Oregon, losing to Washington in a hard-fought game. Not from lack of trying, though. This offensive game on the year had 592 yards against Washington. 13 of those were on the ground. Bo Nix, he's still playing with a lot of confidence. Was, pretty scary. If Bo Nix can find some confidence, that's one thing he really lacked at Auburn. But this year, him and Kenny Dillingham reuniting has really just been, it developed him into a Heisman candidate, really. And I think he's kind of fallen out of that conversation now with the 2 losses, but 73% completion rate, 2,700 yards passing, 24 touchdowns, only 5 picks. And, his legs, he's always been a good runner. 14 touchdowns on the ground. It's a pretty whopping number. 512 yards rushing. He's been the heart and soul of this football team. Gets about 10 carries per contest, and he makes most of them. 6.5 yards per carry. You look at the running backs, though. Bucky Irving, 837, only 2 touchdowns on the year. Bo Nix, he's the one that caps off the drives with his touchdowns. But it's these guys like Bucky Irving, Noah Whittington, two transfers that do the heavy lifting. 618 yards for Whittington. Sean Dollars, he's got a handful of touches this year. This is a football team that is led by a great offensive line, though, as well, Nick. They've only allowed 2 sacks on the year. One of them came late in that game there against Washington when they were trying to close that game out. That's not great to see him give up a sack there, but this is still a unit that is terrific in the trenches. A lot of veterans, too. Alex Forsythe, TJ Bass, those 2 seniors lead the way for them. Mario Cristobal, that's one thing he left over from his tenure, was a terrific offensive line. He also left over a great group of receivers for Oregon as well. It's really been kind of by committee because they've really been dishing it out. I don't believe Chase Cota is healthy, but Chris Hudson, 32 grabs for 395 yards. And then Troy Franklin, 44 grabs, 775 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Terrence Ferguson, he's a versatile weapon, has 24 grabs for 238 and 5 touchdowns. Irving has almost 250 and 3 scores receiving. Dante Thornton doesn't have much production. That's still a very talented ball player as well. The production isn't great from these receivers, Nick, but they do dish it around. Same for the running back group as well. This is a really good offense, again, led by a phenomenal offensive line. This is a Utah defense that struggled a good bit against UCLA a couple weeks ago, a similar style of attack. And, of course, they got gashed by USC. So, what are you looking forward to seeing here? Because Oregon, obviously, just lost, and they're out of playoff contention, so people might write them off. This offense is still clicking on all cylinders.
It was always interesting to me what would Bo Nix do when he was no longer in the spotlight at Auburn. Obviously, Bo Nix, son of legend Pat Nix at Auburn, that was always going to be a high spotlight area, and it certainly didn't help when he had it kind of just fell off for Nix. He transfers to Oregon, gets to a more comfortable environment where the pressure really quite isn't what it was on the Plains, and it's done wonders for his career in college. This season for Bo Nix is absolutely phenomenal. 73% completion percentage, 24 touchdowns, 2,775 yards through the air, and the numbers on the ground are absolutely impressive. 516 total yards rushing, plus the 14 touchdowns. Yes, he has 5 interceptions, which certainly is something that he always struggled with his college career, is turnovers. But the turnovers are down compared to his previous seasons. His first season at Auburn, he had 6 interceptions. Second season, he had 7. Now he's down to 5, trying to cut down on those interceptions. But Bo Nix, he's having fun. He's relaxed. I know that's a joke that people say, but he is playing really well out there, leading this offense. He is the heartbeat of this offense. The total touchdowns for him, 38 on the season, is absolutely impressive. I love the balance of this offense as well. We were talking about Utah's balance. This offense has some balance. Bucky Irving, having a solid season on the ground, 831 total yards on the ground for him. Noah Whittingham, 620 yards. 2 of them got 6 touchdowns between the 2 of them. Sean Dollars, another guy, got 34 touches so far this year, plus a score for him. The wide receiving core, nice balance there as well. Troy Franklin, the nearly 800 yards receiving, the 6 touchdowns for him. Huston, Cota, Ferguson. These guys are all getting catches. I like Ferguson as a tight end, solid size of him, the 5 total touchdowns. This offense can hit you in a lot of different ways, put up a ton of points on the board. I know they lost to Washington this weekend, but there is still a lot of power in this offense. They may be eliminated from playoff contention, but they're certainly looking to go to the Rose Bowl, and this team has a lot of talent and can potentially do that.
Now, looking at the Utah defense, this unit is certainly not brought the physicality we expected this year. They allowed 283 rushing yards week 1 against Florida, got gashed for 200 plus against UCLA and USC. They had over 550 yards of offense, 500 plus as well for the Bruins the week before that. This defense has certainly not been what we thought it would be, Nick. There's certainly some great individual players on here. You look at linebacker Mohamed Diabate's been great. Karen Reed stepping up at linebacker. You look at this offensive line, though, and guys like Jonah Ellis, Connor O'Toole, Junior Tafuna. That's a very talented defensive line. Van Fillinger as well. Gabe Reed, I love the addition from him in the portal, coming over from Stanford. They just have not really playing the way we thought they would. Gabe Reed, for example, no tackles for loss, and 5 out of the last 6 games. We had 2 against USC, but other than that, relatively quiet year. It's just consistency's not been there from this defensive front. They do have 29 sacks, which seems to be like a pretty impressive number, but they kind of ran it up against Stanford where they had 7. They had 7 the 2 games prior in that. So, the last 3 games, Nick, since they played USC where they got absolutely gashed, I think they've played pretty well. Held Washington State to 17. It's a really good offense. Arizona's been giving everyone in the conference fits with their offense. Held them to 20. They held Stanford only 22 rushing yards. It's not a good offense one bit, but they still pride themselves on being able to run the ball and try to play with physicality. Obviously, the last couple of years, they've not been able to do that very well one bit, but seems like the tide is kind of turning with this defense. Not for sure, because they certainly still struggled against the 3 best opponents they played this year big time. Lander Barton, freshman linebacker, very impressive stuff from him this year. The 2 corners, Jatavis Broughton, and then Clark Phillips, who's having a magnificent season. Those are obviously going to be the bright spots of this football team. Phillips has 5 interceptions RJ Hoover stepping up in that other safety spot. He has 2 picks. And Cole Bishop, he leads the team in tackles with 60. They line him up in a variety of different ways. They'll send him off the edge, no problem, to get into the backfield. Bishop, he's phenomenal. He's going to continue to evolve into being one of the top safeties in the country. This is a very good defense on paper when it comes to talent, but when you look at how they, again, have played against the best 3 opponents, there's not a lack of sample size at all, I would say, when you look at their schedule. Kind of a mixed bag, but for the most part, they have not been all that good, and now they're facing this incredible offense of Oregon on the road. They don't seem to fare well. What are you expecting?
This defense certainly has struggled. I think they will struggle on Saturday against Oregon. I like Mohamed Diabate having a solid year, 31 total tackles for him, plus the 3 sacks and the pass breakup for him. 60 total tackles, 1.5 sacks for him on the season. Reed as well, 4 sacks for him, 54 total tackles. This defense, we had a lot of expectations of whether or not they'd be able to keep up with and replace some of the talent they lost last year. And they really have struggled with that. They've given up a lot of points in certain situations. Defense, it's only allowing 20 points per game, and there have been good weeks, against Stanford, against Arizona, against Washington State. But I just think that they've been in the games that mattered. They really have struggled. UCLA, USC, the defense has kind of folded in those big games. Struggled at times against Florida as well. Another guy I'm looking at, Clark Phillips. I expected more of him. Only 21 total tackles in the year for him, plus the 1 sack. Gabe Reed as well. Wanted to see more out of him. 22 total tackles plus the 3.5 sacks. This is a good defense. I just don't think it's a great defense. I think Bo Nix will have potential to pick this defense apart.
And the same can be said about the Oregon defense. I do think they've had, their strings of success. They played pretty well against Arizona. They didn't, I think they did enough against UCLA. Still gave up 30 points in that one. They, did a good job of limiting the explosive plays, though, I thought, in that one. And then here against Washington, 400-plus yards. Got really carved up in the secondary there. There's some great individual players on this defense as well. Brandon Dorless on the defensive line. He has 8.5 tackle for loss for them. Noah Sewell, great linebacker. You look at Justin Flo also. He's another guy that's really highly impressive, brings a lot of physicality to the table. Bennett Williams, I was glad they had him back. Christian Gonzalez, this guy, he's really skyrocketing up draft boards, with his size, 6'2", 201, to run the way he does, the ball skills. He has 3 picks, 7 pass breakups. He's terrific, and I do think that they're going to look to match him up more often than not on the outside with some of those speed receivers, Lee and Parks. I'm not sure how they're kind of rate this defense because, looking at this game, I do think that physicality is something they could potentially struggle with because, you look at the Georgia game, for example, they got pushed around, as does everybody, though. But for the most part, I think they've done a pretty good job against the run. Only 114 against Washington. Colorado, though, they did have a handful of big plays. UCLA had only 186, but they're kind of crawling back from behind in that one. It's an interesting defense for Oregon. I do think they're probably going to struggle a good bit. I do like what they have in the secondary with Jamal Hill and Chris Bridges, but they struggled a good bit against Washington, 400-plus yards, gave up numerous big plays. Obviously, that's not the same threat that Utah has, but I do think Utah will probably run the ball quite well against this front, and that's going to open up the door for play action. Interesting game here for Oregon. What is your expectations from this defense on Saturday?
I like some of the ways this defense has improved. Like you said, Gonzalez, the speed he has, considering his size, an impressive 45 total tackles, 3 interceptions. He's having a great season. Bassa as well, leading the way with 46 total tackles. Bennett Williams has 45 as well. Noah Sewell has 42. So there certainly is a bit of a spread in the tackling department. But this team just isn't quite the defense that we had hoped. We didn't know quite really how strong this defense would be. They have struggled certainly at times so far this year. Giving up 46 points to Georgia week 1, things like that. There certainly have been poor opportunities for this team. But I like some of the talent they have in the secondary. Williams, Gonzalez, I like that talent. Jamal Hill's another guy I like at defensive back. 37 total tackles for him. Bridges as well, got 35 total tackles. I just think we're going to see a shootout here. We talked about a previous Pac-12 game. If USC and UCLA was a shootout, I think this game will also be a shootout. I think these offenses are just so high-flying, the defense are going to struggle to keep up.
Now looking at team comparisons, quarterbacks kind of even. Cam Rising's great. Bo Nix, he's having an elite season. So I'm going to kind of call that one even. I never call it even when it comes to quarterbacks, but this one I think I'm going to have to. Running back, I think kind of the same can be said. I'm going to give Oregon a slight edge, even though I love Tavion Thomas. They don't really have that 1-2 punch in the backfield, kind of like Whittington and Bucky Irving have for Oregon. The receiving core, I'm going to give it the Ducks. They're a little bit more deeper, I would say. There's only about 3 guys that really get involved in the receiving game for Utah. Oregon, got to give the offensive line the edge there. They're paving the way for a tremendous group, a tremendous effort on the ground, 240 yards rushing. They only have 2 sacks allowed all year, fewest in college football. Tremendous there. Looking at defensive line as well. Again, I'm going to give this one to Oregon, even though Utah has that potential and they have that talent. They've not really showed up this year like I imagined they would, especially on the ground against the run. Linebacker, I'm going to give that one to Utah. And then in the secondary, I think Clark Phillips is going to give them a big edge. And then Oregon, they're coming off a thrashing against Washington, so you really can't, with a good conscience, give them the edge there. So I'm going to give Utah the slight edge there in the secondary. You have any disagreements here with this team comparisons? Two rosters that really kind of seem to be very similar.
I agree. These rosters are certainly very similar in regards. The quarterbacks, they're very even on any given Saturday. I think, I'd personally take Cam Rising, but I could make the argument for Bo Nix, certainly with the season he's having. I think just Cam Rising is a little more balanced in general and a better leader for his team. There's a lot of these things are very matched up well. The secondary is certainly, you could probably flip a coin and pick which one you want to say for the secondary. So I think your picks so far on the team comparisons are certainly solid, and I agree with those picks. But this is an interesting matchup. These two teams are very balanced.
Well, again, final thoughts and the prediction on this one. Pac-12 title eliminator. The winner of this one will go on to play USC or UCLA in Las Vegas. I think the biggest key for Utah, control clock. You want to keep that offense on the sideline. That's always a great thing to do on the road. Easy way to quiet down the crowd. That's what they were doing against UCLA. They had to settle for some field goals early instead of touchdowns. So, they were running the ball. I think Thomas had double-figure carries in the first quarter alone. That was the game plan in that one, just like I expected it to be. They're running it right at them, and it worked pretty well. I thought they were very successful at doing that. They couldn't sustain that for the entire game, the way the defense was playing. But I think that's still going to be the game plan here is try to run the football and, be effective with your play action to Kincaid and Valet and Parks. For Oregon, play smash mouth football. This is a run defense we've seen struggle with physicality. Run it right at them with your phenomenal offensive line. And I think that's what the difference maker will be. I really want to pick Utah in this one, Nick, but I think Oregon, even though the secondary came off a bad game, they're not really facing a big threat in terms of downfield passing. I think we'll do just enough in the trenches on the defensive side of the ball, kind of like the UCLA game where it's going to force them to make some plays through the air. And I think Cam Rising, his maturity, his leadership will do wonders here on the road for them. But I think this offensive line for Oregon is going to be night and day the advantage. I'm going to take them to win this one. 42-32. I think Oregon gets the job done and they'll punch their ticket to Vegas.
I'm going to take Utah on this one. I think it's going to be a very close, high-scoring game. I'm going to take Utah to win 45-38. I just think they're going to have the opportunity here. I think Cam Rising, I like him in this leadership role. I like his experience. I think he has the best chance here to kind of show his skills and on the road quiet that crowd early. I think they have to get on the tempo early, get on the pace early, set the story early on, get some points. I think they have the potential to outscore Oregon on this given Saturday. Both these teams have high-flying offenses and defenses that are a bit weaker, but I think Utah's going to win this game and punch their ticket to go back to Las Vegas and try and win back-to-back Pac-12 titles.
This is going to be a great game. It's one of the tougher ones to predict on the weekend. It sucks it's buried on the late night slate, the nightcap 10:30 on ESPN, but I'll be up and I'll be watching it. As always, Nick, I appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much. Excited to see how this Pac-12 matchup goes.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.